the bitterness from the orange gives us the acidity that we need to balance the honey. And at some point, he had to figure out how many oranges you put in there to balance the honey. And he also had to figure out first, probably before oranges, how much honey do I need to use to balance out the alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once I figure that out, how many oranges do I have to use to bring the honey into the proper balance with the other adjuncts, which we're going to move on to that here in just a second. We're going to continue back with our little bike wheel here. But all of the parts and pieces in that are specifically designed to work together, like what we're looking at trying to learn how to do with much, much more pieces involved here tonight. So let's go back to our wheel, and we had the left and right spoke, right? And so on that, we want to put over there honey intensity on the left. So right in there, honey intensity. And on the right-hand side, right versus VS, like, as opposed to, or boxing or whatever, versus your other adjuncts or your additions. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's right versus additions or adjuncts, but underneath that in parentheses, now we can talk about fruit. We can talk about spices. We can talk about herbs. What other things would be these other? So basically, if you have, and I see this all the time, I want to make a mead, Mr. Facebook. Please tell me. And I'm going to put 1 pound of raspberries in there. Well, a pound of raspberries, even if you made just a glass of mead, wouldn't probably hardly be enough. Raspberries would probably work because of the tartness, but too oftentimes people don't want to add enough fruit to the honey. So now in this new piece that we just added, we're looking at, we need to look at the honey intensity, meaning the perceived sweetness of the honey, right? Going back to where we started earlier, that some honeys have much more intensity than others. But not only now we've talked about our sweetness and the acid, alcohol, and tannins, but now we also have to consider the intensity of the honey versus the other additions that we have to add. Because if it doesn't have enough honey in it, then it probably tastes pretty good, but does it represent a mead? A mead has to have a particular fraction of the overall being the taste of the honey, doesn't it? Now, one thing that you may or may not know at this point in time, depending on how much mead you've made, is it doesn't have to taste like raw honey. And a lot of times you might not even be able, at least early on as a newbie, to taste the honey, but after you've made a bunch, you realize that the honey provides kind of an earthy flavor. And so it doesn't have to taste like you just stuck your hand in Winnie the Pooh's cookie jar, but it does need to then be balanced with your additions that are the other your other actors in the play, your supporting cast members. Right?
There you go.
Yeah. So if you go, well, it tastes too much like honey, all right, we can make these adjustments on this other spoke, right, the acidity, alcohol, and tannins. But if I'm making a mellow mill, I also have to have that balanced with my honey intensity versus my fruit. And so that's something else that we have to balance against each other. So I just made a mellow mill and I can't hardly taste my fruit. Well,
and we already got questions.
Sure. So hang on just a second.
No worries.
The first answer might come to, I would bet if we asked everybody, the first answer was, well, add more fruit. That's certainly an option, without a doubt, but maybe we add less honey. Or if you guys have listened to the podcast we did on mellow mills, on piements, if you make a piement through a wine kit, it tells you to add X amount of water. And then if you just add a bunch more honey to jack up your gravity to get to a certain ABV, say 12 or 14 or 15 or whatever percent you're looking for, I have found through experience that that's a very, what I call it will end up a fruit bomb. It's very fruit heavy, and oftentimes you don't really get that honey fraction in there other than you get that kind of earthiness that comes from fermented honey. So here's an example of where adding more fruit's not the answer. Dilute the fruit, dilute the pine mid so that you're watering down the fruit flavor, you're watering down the grape concentrate so that then gives space for the honey to kind of show up and to stand, in the spotlight or in the secondary spotlight, depending on. And here again is the point that we need to always consider. There's not a right answer. You might want a fruit heavy thing with just a little bit of the honey, or you might want the honey to be stronger in your flavor profile than the particular fruit or spice that you're adding. That's up to you because you're the creator. But if these things are done in balance, you're going to have a very nice mead. And if they're out of balance, it's not going to fly that well because you're going to go, all I can taste is fruit. Is there honey in here? Or really, there's cherries in there? I don't pick out a cherry one, which is kind of probably the biggest error. Is most people don't want to buy the amount of fruit that you need to put in your mead to really pick up the fruit. And then you have to ask yourself, is this fruit something that I really want to showcase? I mean, do I just love this fruit and I want this to taste like a cherry? Or do I want it to taste more like an apple with a cherry on the top? And then do I want to put all of that in a big bowl of syrup? Or do I want to ooze a little squirt of syrup, or not syrup, but honey on top of my apple with the cherry stuff down the center of the hole? Do you guys get what I'm trying to put here? All of these parts and pieces are up to you to build how you want, but to make them, quote, magical, like we talked about earlier, they need to be in the proper perspective of each contributing to the whole, but not stealing away from your superstars, the prima donna. And also, we live in this world where I made a Jome and a bomb, and now I'm going to make this weirdo mel, and I'm going to showcase 17 different things. Well, no, you're not.
Been there, done that.
Because here's the deal. Let's go back to the color wheel. If you guys have played with colors, and we all did. I mean, we all went to the third grade, right? You add too many colors, and all you end up with is ugly army green.
No, that's not necessarily true. I mean, if you know what you're doing. I mean, mine started out that I did with like 17 different things. Started out, it was terrible when it first got bottled, but after a couple years of aging, it was actually quite good. So you can do that, but the point is...
It's harder.
It's much harder, yeah, because there's a lot. It's a balancing act, and you've got 17 people on the teeter-totter. So,
right, exactly.
Going back to your... I love that.
I've played music all my life, and I've played in orchestras and marching bands and then in stage bands, rock bands, all that. Think of this as you're the conductor, and there's times where you're sitting there pointing at your trumpet section, and you want them to play loud, and you've got your clarinets over here just kind of hovering around in the background, not really making a whole lot of fuss, and then suddenly the music's just changed, and now your trombone section's going crazy, and your trumpets might be sitting out.
Yeah.
And so we're conducting an orchestra, and all these parts and pieces have to come together how you want them, but they also have to come together. So this is not balanced that the fruit tastes the same proportion. The fruit's 50-50 to the honey. No, it could be 95-5 and still be perfect. Or it could be the opposite, 95-5. And the other 5 comes from the alcohol, tannins, and acids. You see what I'm saying? There's such a huge variety of meads that are really good or even magical that are all over the color wheel spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so somebody had a question.
Jaden says, I use 12 pounds of strawberry for a 7.9 gallon fermenter to 20 pounds of honey. How much would you add in contrast to give it that magic?
Well, Oh, good question.
I know what I'd go to, but
The first answer is this. Do you want it to be a strawberry fruit bomb, or do you want it? I look at mead a lot of times. I can make two different things. I can make what I call a table wine, which is good to eat with food, and it's not very fruit or honey heavy. So you need to ask yourself first, how much strawberry presence do I want here? I make two. When I make a batch of strawberry, but I make two batches at the same time. Now let me explain what I mean here. You have to decide, do I want this to be very strong on the strawberry, or is the strawberry the supporting cast member? Now, secondly, and if you haven't done this, and I'm speaking for everybody that's going to ever listen to this podcast, one of the first things you need to do when you start playing with fruit is this. Fruit will taste different if it's fermented up front in the fermentation versus if it's been added after you've stabilized on the backside. Just like grapes, wine doesn't taste like grapes because it's been fermented, but it's grape-like. And for those of you that are good with wine and you have a good palate, we learned that we can taste what grapes, right? Or at least we think this grape should taste something similar to this, and we have that in our mind. Fruit's the same way. If you ferment the fruit up front, it's going to taste different than if you take the same amount of poundage, the same weight in fruit, and add it after you've stabilized, because then you have the alcohol extracting all of the fruit flavors and all the fruit sugars out of the flesh, but it's not being fermented. And so the fruit up front in the primary is going to be less intense. And if you put the fruit in the backside, it's going to taste more jam or jelly-like. It's going to taste more like the fresh fruit. So if you haven't done this yet, here's what you need to do. Make 2 batches of mead. Make them all the exact same in every way. Make them at the same time, too. But in batch A, put all your fruit up in front. And in batch B, put all your fruit in the back. And in doing so, you're going to learn, what does my fruit taste like if I add it on the back side versus if I put it in the front side? Now, if you want to do a third batch at the same time, add half your fruit up front. After you stabilize, now take and add the remaining other half in at the back side. Or you can get something very similar by just doing the 2 batches and then blending together after they're both completed and finished. And then you can also blend to where it's more the B batch than it is the A batch. Now, I told you I do both at the same time. Here's what I do. Who asked this question? Was it?
It was Jaden. It was Jaden.
Okay,
yeah.
Jaden, here's what I do. And I make bigger batches than a lot of home brewers just because I can. And I'm practicing. I hope at some point to become professional. But I have some other pieces in my life that have to come together before that. But in any case, that's where I always have that in the back of my mind. But I'll make a batch of strawberries. Strawberries are very, very delicate. It takes a boatload of strawberries to make very much difference.
It really does.
It really, really does. Same with peaches and pears.
I don't know. I've had peaches work out pretty good, but I use peach cider, so it depends.
That helps.
If you use peach fruit, if you're using, and that's another point to make. If you're using juice as opposed to fruit, it makes a huge difference because you've got concentrated juice there, where with the fruit, when you're fermenting it, it has to extract that juice and then convert it. So it's a whole nother animal, because when I make my peach melomels, I go down, there's a place I go to where I can get gallon jugs of peach juice. And so I'm not using peaches. I'm using peach juice, so it's basically a peach sizer. at that point.
Oh, so you're not even using real peaches
Not
after?
a single peach season,
I
no.
see.
And so it's
Okay.
like 4 gallons of peach cider, and then
Right.
whatever else I put in there, usually cinnamon and
Uh-huh.
honey. I mean,
Yeah.
it's generally pretty simple, but yeah, I mean, it makes a huge difference. And